Patrick, given the complex nature of the crises that Turkey is facing, first describe the atmosphere on the street, what it's like.
Well, for the most part, you would think that it's just any normal country in the world. But when you talk to people, people are tense. They're fearful. They have a referendum that's coming up that will decide the future of their country. They have two terrorism campaigns being waged inside their country. They have a brutal civil war on the other side of the southern border. And they also are facing economic hardship. They host the largest number of Syrian refugees in the world, somewhere approaching 3 million. So there's lots of things going wrong in the country. And everyone probably knows someone who's affected by the crackdown on dissidents of all kinds. Over 100,000 people have been purged from the government or from the private sector since the failed coup last year. And around 45,000 people have been arrested. So that's a lot of people. And people are nervous as a result, because you never know quite who's going to be targeted yet.
We've heard a lot about the opposition and the sort of anti-democratic nature of the referendum and the powers that it may give to Erdogan. Who are Erdogan's supporters, and why do they support him?
So in the last elections, somewhere between 40 and 50% of the country voted for his party. So he does have quite a large constituency. And these are people that are very grateful to the president and his allies for improving the quality of life. Famously, he's built bridges, roads, hospitals, he's improved healthcare, he's improved welfare. In the 15 years or so since he came to power, life has improved for the majority of the country. And as a result, his followers are very grateful for that. And they also feel that they have an increased sense of dignity as a result of his tenure. Before he came to power, pious people who wore headscarves were banned from working in most of the public sector. Today, that's not the case. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, headscarf women were permitted to work in the final bastion of the Turkish secular establishment, the army, completing a series of legislative reforms over the past decade and a half. They've gradually allowed headscarf women to work in the public sector. So it's things like that, matters of dignity, added to pocketbook issues, economic issues, that mean that he still has a very large following and mean that he could well win this referendum coming up on 16th of April.
If he does win, some have described Turkey as, in effect, turning its back on the West, on Europe, and becoming a more Putin-esque state, I think was the phrase one observer described. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, the opposition's analysis of the constitutional reforms that the referendum would enact are that it would centralize an extraordinary amount of power around one man, the president, who in this case is President Erdogan. So there are fears indeed that this could turn into a more Putin-esque state. The question of whether Turkey turns its back on the West as a result is more complex. If you look at the way that Turkey has reacted to Europe, to Holland, to Germany in the last few weeks, as a result of Mr. Erdogan's surrogates being prevented from campaigning among the Turkish diaspora in Europe, certainly it does look like Turkey and Europe are approaching some kind of point of no return. However, it is an election campaign. Some things can be said in the heat of an election campaign that maybe can be undone afterwards. And whether or not the relationship between Turkey and Europe recovers, some analysts I've been talking to this week feel that it's unlikely that Turkey would sever ties, for example, with America. Yes, in the last year, Turkey has pivoted towards Russia. But in the words of one analyst I spoke to yesterday, that relationship is becoming slightly counterproductive, partly because the Russians, according to the Kurds in northern Syria, are beginning to work with the Syrian Kurds in establishing a base there. The Russians deny this. But that's one example of how Turkey, even though it's become warmer towards Russia in the last year, might not be prepared to sever ties completely with the West. It's quite isolated at the moment. It has a war-torn Syria to its south. It's not close to Iran, another country on its borders. Russia is proving a slightly unreliable partner. And if it continues to cut ties with Europe, then Turkey will still need to rely on the United States.
I was going to say, we saw the U.S. Secretary of State there this week, and certainly, I mean, the U.S. interest is in defeating ISIS, and that's what Tillerson spoke about. But what kind of influence do you think the United States actually has in Turkey now?
Well, if you look at what Secretary Tillerson said today, he was he was quite kind about the situation in Turkey. He tried not to comment on the crackdown on civil liberties, and that suggests that whatever influence the US may have, it's not prepared to use it. And that is probably because the US is pursuing a policy in northern Syria, working with the Syrian Kurds, that is not to Ankara's liking. Additionally, the man that Ankara believes orchestrated last year's failed coup attempt, Fethullah Gulen, the Islamic cleric, he's living in the US, and it's not within the president's power to extradite him to Turkey as Turkey would like. So there's a number of things that Turkey is angry with America about, and so for that is one reason why someone like Secretary Tillerson can't really come to Turkey and start waggling his finger about, even if it was in the Trump administration's interests to do so.
Patrick, thank you very much for your insight on this.
Thank you.